Let's discuss this now with SABC News Correspondent Nick Harper, who joins us for more. Nick, good evening. Thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. I would assume the US State Department and the White House aren't particularly happy with President Ramaphosa's rejection of their request for the handover to happen to the embassy chargé d'affaires at the summit. What has been the sentiment coming out of those two buildings?
Good evening, Oliver. Yeah, that's right. I mean, really defiance here from the United States and unhappiness in the way that things have taken place over the last few days. We already knew that US-South Africa relations weren't exactly on the strongest footing of recent years, but what we've seen during the course of the weekend, the fact that President Ramaphosa said that he would not have that ceremonial handing over of the gavel to the US chargé d'affaires, instead putting it to later in the week to make it a low-key affair, that certainly hasn't helped to shore up US-South Africa relations. But the US has been somewhat defiant in the face of South Africa's defiance. Of course, we saw South Africa and the other G20 countries putting out that declaration, even though Washington had warned them against it, saying that quite simply because it wasn't there, it would have been unable to find consensus. But South Africa decided to go ahead anyway, and that has promoted and prompted an angry response here from Washington. We've seen them accusing South Africa of weaponizing the G20 presidency, saying that South Africa had undermined the founding principles, so the principles that were based on consensus. They also said that Donald Trump would restore the legitimacy of the G20 when the US takes over the presidency of it next year. And what is not clear, though, at this stage is whether or not the US will decide to bar South Africa from next year's events because of what has taken place in Johannesburg over the last few days. But certainly unhappiness here in Washington as a result of all of this.
If the US were to bar South Africa from participating in the summit going forward under the US presidency, would that constitute, or would it happen under the order of a sanction?
Well, potentially, yes. I mean, it would be a very strong diplomatic message being sent by Washington to Pretoria if it were to go ahead with that. I mean, it would seem that it would be unthinkable in normal years. But of course, this year has not been a normal year. The very fact that the US decided to not just not send a leader in the form of Donald Trump, but not send any delegation at all, that really threw the summit into problems right from the start. But I think what we have seen is a success of multilateralism, the fact that the other G20 countries were able to come together, despite the boycott from the US, despite the boycott as well from Argentina not sending its president. And I think as a result, we have seen the G20 overcome those problems, show that multilateralism is still alive, and in many ways do something that many world leaders have not wanted to do in recent months, and that's stand up to Donald Trump. There was that united front in Pretoria, even though it has sparked more anger here in Washington.
Importantly here is that Keir Starmer, as well as Emmanuel Macron and potentially even Canada, are considered, I mean Canada to a lesser extent, are considered strong allies of Donald Trump. Of course, we've seen Keir Starmer visit the White House, and we've seen Donald Trump visit Windsor Castle, and of course had that bilateral engagement with Keir Starmer, and of course representative of the House of Lords. And we've seen many engagements in the last 12 months, in the last 9 months actually, more specifically, between Emmanuel Macron and Donald Trump. And these are his allies, but these are two gentlemen who threw their weight and support behind President Cyril Ramaphosa. Has the US and the White House responded to that?
They haven't directly responded leader by leader, but it is interesting, as you mentioned, Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, Keir Starmer in particular, being seen as a strong ally of the US president, something that he's tried to do really to create himself as a leader that is indispensable to the US leader. In particular, when it comes to the issue of Ukraine, he has tried to walk that fine line of showing that he has the US president's back on multiple issues, but has also tried at times to nudge him in a certain direction, not standing up to him directly, as some other leaders perhaps have done, but rather suggests things that the US president could do that's perhaps more in line with other countries thinking, like the European Union and what it wants on Ukraine. So I think it was a difficult line for some of those European leaders who view themselves as allies to the US and are viewed here in Washington as allies, throwing their lot in with South Africa and coming ahead with this resolution, this proclamation, the declaration that was put out at the end of the summit. And I think they did that because they wanted to show that they are on the side of the G20, are on the side of multilateralism, even though the United States under Donald Trump is continuing to push that America First agenda that's all about remaining here in the United States and not going outside of US borders to go hand in hand with other nations when it comes to multilateralism.
Nick, just lastly, the handover is likely to happen tomorrow at the offices of the Department of International Relations. How soon thereafter can we expect to hear from the White House press room about what the direction is that the American presidency hopes to take and aims to take the G20 into? We've got a sense that they'll want to do inclusivity, sustainability and solidarity as a thematic framework. But do we have a sense about where their heart and mind are?
Well, in theory, we would hear quite quickly. That would be the normal follow-up by the new G20 incoming president. But, of course, this is a very different situation. The White House may decide to drag its heels. We're already hearing that it may look to scale down G20 engagements next year, potentially just holding a leaders summit and a financial summit, cutting out many of the lower ministers' engagement, in particular any meetings that involved energy, health and environment. They might be done away with by the White House. But I think there are, like you mentioned, going to be certain areas like key financial gains, those development and financial stability goals that both countries have. I think those type of things will be carried over by the United States, even if it's looking to have perhaps a pared down G20 when it comes to hosting it next year.
Nick Harper, thank you so much for that. Really do appreciate it. SABC News Correspondent Nick Harper coming to us live from Washington.